What is good, everyone? It is your guy, Don James, and welcome back to the 5 Years Later series. If you're new to the channel, I'm doing a series where I break down every billion-dollar film from 2019 to get a sense of how well it's aged. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and subscribe. Today we will be talking about The Lion King. No, not the good one, the remake from 2019. There we go. I am so glad that I did not release this video too soon this year, because I would have had to name a very shameful fact in this video. But thanks to another movie that won't be named yet, I don't have to anymore. Anyways, here's the format and let's get right on into this. So for the beginning part of this video, I'm just going to fast forward through my introduction to the Aladdin remake, because the first part of this background could pretty much just be the same thing.
So as many of you know, following the release of 2010's Alice in Wonderland, Disney began to crack down on making a lot more live-action adaptations to their prior animated works. For a little while, they were dabbling into some of their works from the Golden Age of the Silver Age, but in 2017, Disney decided to start adapting their Renaissance film, starting with Beauty and the Beast. The film was a massive success, and before you knew it, Disney had plans to adapt more of their Renaissance films. Their next two planned films were going to zone in on the two highest-grossing movies from their Renaissance eras, that being first The Lion King and then Aladdin. Oh, believe me, we will get to the remake of The Lion King later.
Welp, later has arrived. So right off the bat, when trying to remake a movie as iconic as The Lion King, one big immediate question was, who was going to direct this? Remember Happy from Far From Home? Yeah, I'm sure you do. Well, on September 18th, 2016, Disney announced that he would be directing this movie. They probably made this decision because he had directed a remake before for them, being the famous 2016 Jungle Book, which is usually considered one of the best of the live-action remakes. And it included photorealistic animals, so they probably wanted him to take on this task. Did it work, though? Did it work, though? Anyways, it was time for casting. So this movie pretty much said screw you to the OG voice cast besides one person. So in mid-February of 2017, Donald Glover was signed on to voice Simba. But in general, there were a lot of big names that kind of replaced the OG voice cast. You had John Oliver as Zazu, Billy Eichner as Timon, Seth Rogen as Pumbaa, Chiwetel Ejiofor as Scar, and then you also had people like Alfred Woodward as Sarabi and John Connie as Rafiki. Oh, and you also had Keegan-Michael Key, Eric Andre, and Florence Kasamba as the three hyenas who were stupidly renamed. The only person, at least main voice actor, to reprise their role was James Earl Jones as Mufasa. And yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up the voice cast. Oh crap. So Jon Favreau had stated that his top choice and top desire for Nala was Beyonce. However, at the time of casting, Beyonce was pregnant with twins and also, still a world-famous singer. So Jon Favreau was clear that he was willing to do whatever it took to accommodate with her schedule. But they were able to get Beyonce to successfully join in on the project, and she was confirmed in November of 2017. Now, one of the big things that this movie was known for good and bad, was its photorealistic animation. So how was this created? Well, for starters, the animators primarily relied on the moving picture company to provide the visual effects for the film. And this was the same company that provided visual effects for the Jungle Book animals, so it made sense for them to return. In total, there were around 1,500 VFX shots in the film. And according to Favreau at least, there was only one shot in the film that was just a real photo. but there were so many meticulous things that went into creating the photorealistic animation in this film, including VR technology, adjusted lighting, motion capture, CGI, facial capture tech. Look, there are so many intricate details that went into the making of the photorealistic animation, so I think the best thing I could do is recommend that you watch a video by Insider that goes into great detail on how this process was done.
Adult Simba's mane alone consisted of about 700,000 strands of hair. The hairs can't just sit still. The animation team created new systems for the Lion King, specifically for gusts of wind passing through long hair. Hairs on a lion's mane blowing in the wind can be tricky to control, so they made sure the strands behind the leading hairs in these shots wouldn't move as much, helping to create a sense that these animals were covered in layers of hair. While extremely subtle, Newman says it's the kind of specific detail that, if not done correctly, the viewer will notice.
I'll link it below in the description. And by the way, speaking of photorealism, I hope you don't mind if I sometimes play clips of actual nature videos. Because hey, if this movie wanted to try so hard to pass this off as live action, then why not pair it off with actual live action? Like, who's to say this wasn't actual footage on the set of the remake? It was probably just a deleted scene. Anyways, the Lion King Remake premiered in Hollywood on July 9th, 2019, and then released widespread to theaters on July 19th. Unfortunately, yet predictably, this movie broke many box office records, including being the second highest grossing film of 2019, the seventh highest grossing movie of all time at its peak, and the highest grossing animated film of all time, a record that it still holds to this day. No. Yes! I never, ever have to utter that nonsensical, shameful statement ever again on this channel. Thank you, Inside Out 2. So, I'm gonna be honest. I'm not completely done with all of my analysis of 2019 billion-dollar films, but my guess is that this and another film felt like they were practically designed to age poorly. I mean, you take one of the most iconic, culturally significant, acclaimed animated films of all time, and you essentially copy and paste it in a version with more uninspired voice acting, less respect for the songs, and its only distinct novelty being that it utilizes photorealistic animation that gives the characters about the charm of a brick wall. Gee, what could possibly go wrong 5 years later when that novelty probably wears off? Sorry for letting my biases probably get in the way of this a little bit, but I'll try to let the data speak for itself. But, you know, sometimes I just gotta roast this film. So to start out, I just want to go over the three major aggregate websites for movie reviews, that being Rotten Tomatoes, IMDb, and Metacritic. So starting with Rotten Tomatoes, you know what? That's actually pretty clever, Bob. The only problem is that instead of a fresh tomato, critics in 2019 were not huge fans of The Lion King, giving it a rotten score of 52%. Audiences were more kind towards the movie, giving it an 82%. As for IMDb, they gave it an average score of a 6.8 out of 10, which is, you know, that's above average. And when breaking up the user reviews by the best, the decent, and the worst, the 10 out of 10s garnered about 19% of 3,136 reviews. The 6 out of 10s garnered about 8.4%, and the 1 out of 10s got about 13.6%. So in general, that indicates that this movie was quite polarizing. And Metacritic's score was quite similar to Rotten Tomatoes, giving it a 55 score, and the audience gave it a 6.4, which is definitely not as good as the 82 from Rotten Tomatoes. So in general, it can be summed up that audience members enjoyed this film a good bit more than critics did. which is actually a common trend for Disney remakes. This is not a knock on general audiences at all. I mean, technically, I'm part of the general audience, but they tend to grant more leeway to films based off of nostalgia than critics do. That doesn't mean that they're wrong or that critics are smarter. I mean, of course they're not. But I would say that trend seemed pretty common, at least during the period from Alice in Wonderland to The Lion King. Because after The Lion King, things actually changed a good bit. Like when Disney made a bunch of strange changes to the original source material, critics tended to like those movies more than the audience. But anyways, I also want to move into YouTubers who made reviews in 2019 to get a little sample of what the reception was like on this platform. So I used Sean Chandler, Chris Stuckman, Jeremy Johns, and both of the Carlin brothers. So starting with Sean Chandler, he gave the film a B+. Chris Stuckman was more negative on the film, giving it a C. Jeremy Johns also leaned more negative or meh on the film, saying it would be better if he was drunk. Ben Carlin gave it a 6 out of 10, and Jay gave it a 6.5 out of 10. And it's worth noting that when both of them first saw it, they did not like the movie. It's also worth noting that on their end of the year list for 2019, they were pretty clear that The Lion King was easily their least favorite billion-dollar film from 2019. So I would say that YouTube's sample aggregation demonstrates a lean slightly more towards the critic side than the audience side of Rotten Tomatoes, but I would say it's a little bit more positive. So I'd say from the YouTube samples, the results are kind of mixed, but they teeter negative. But when summing up the overall 2019 reception, I think the best way of saying it is that critics did not like it, but audience members liked it enough. I mean, I think pretty much everyone can universally agree that, unlike Favreau's Jungle Book, which many thought was better than the original, nobody thinks this remake was better than the original Lion King. And that would be kind of an unfair request because The Lion King is an all-time great. But common praises that were given to the movie was the humor, especially from Timon and Pumbaa, as well as the technical brilliance of the animation. And common criticisms was the emotionless expressions of the animals, occasions of weak voice acting, baffling decisions with songs, and a feeling that it was just kind of unnecessary and too derivative of the original. But I think most of the reception ultimately came down to how people approached the film. If someone was just approaching it for just a nice little time at the movies, I think that this movie offered enough nostalgia beats, humor, and technical brilliance that pretty much gave them exactly what they were expecting. If people walked into this wanting the movie to stand on its own ground and distinguish itself as a film that they would want to watch apart from the original, then I think they were probably a lot more angry and disappointed by this film, because I think many would agree that outside of the theater, they would rather just watch the original. And hey, that's a great segue into 2024 reception. So when looking at how people responded to this film 5 years later, what I first did was I took the aggregate scores from Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb that were rated in 2024. So starting with Rotten Tomatoes, there were 40 reviews that have been made for this film this year, and the reviews were not pretty, with a 2.46 out of 5-star average, which would be a Rotten score if you converted it to a percentage, and a huge drop off from the 82% audience score. Hey, that's much better, Bob. Then moving over to IMDb, there were 28 reviews that were made in 2024. Out of 28 total reviews, the average score was a 5.39 out of 10. Again, quite a drop off from the 6.8 score in 2019. Well, what do you know? After it left the theaters, significantly less people gave a crap about this film. By the way, does anyone find it strange that the highest grossing movie of all time and the former highest grossing animated film are two of the most forgettable mega blockbusters of the modern day. Like, talk about films that are strictly designed for the theater. Anyways, moving on to YouTube samples. I utilized 5 YouTubers who made rankings of live action remakes since the release of The Little Mermaid. So I used Sean Chandler, Brittany Reacts, Dan Morell, Aldone, and Zach Pope. So starting with Sean Chandler, in 2019 he also had made a ranking, and he had The Lion King all the way up at 4th out of 16 movies. Well, 5 years later, it took a dramatic drop going from 4th to 17th place out of 22 films. Like, holy cow, from like top 5 to nearly bottom 5.
This is a classic example of a one-time watch movie for me.
Brittany Reacts had made a tier list of live action remakes, and she had The Lion King in the bad tier. So I don't even really have to go further with that. That tells you all that you need to know. Dan Morell had 14 movies on his remakes list. And by the way, even in 2024, people have different numbers of total remakes because some people consider remakes to be different things. But out of 14 movies, Dan Morell had The Lion King all the way at 9th place out of 14, which is, I guess, not super low given the small number of films, but it's still bottom 5, and he was leaning more negative on it. Aldone had 12 movies on his remakes list, and he definitely hated this film, and he had it all the way at the bottom. And Zach Pope ranked the film at 15th out of 23 films. And from his sentiment on it, it sounded like he was kind of mixed negative on the film. So pretty much all of these YouTubers are pretty negative on the film and don't like it. Of course, this doesn't mean that every single person on the planet or every person on YouTube doesn't like this remake. But you would expect from a diversified set of mainstream YouTubers that at least one of them would be positive. But all of them leaned more negative on this film. Also, I wanted to include some websites that made rankings in 2024 because I feel like website companies tend to reflect more of the reception of critics. So I used IndieWire, Parade, Screen Rant, Vulture, and Collider. So IndieWire had the film ranked 14th out of 21 films, and it seemed like they were kind of mixed to mixed negative on it. Parade had the film at 15th out of 17 movies, so in their bottom 3. Screen Rant ranked the film at 13th out of 21. Vulture had the film ranked 19th out of 23 films, and Collider had the film ranked 15th out of 18 movies. So Screen Rant was the most positive of these 5 companies, and even at best for Screen Rant, it sounded like their summation of the film was mixed. So quite negative from critics as well. Pretty much all of these website companies had the Lion King remake in their bottom 3 or bottom 5. And the pervading criticism throughout all of these reviews and receptions was just that this movie did not properly translate to a photorealistic environment. Like, it may look nice, but translating this Shakespearean Disney epic into a setting that looks like a nature documentary, the scenes just don't hit as hard because hyper-realistic animals cannot do the same things and evoke the same power and emotion as you can do with traditional animation. I mean, just a little example is when Rafiki lifts Simba over the rock. Like, that was such a massive and powerful moment from the original film that conveyed a sense of grandeur. And in the remake, this man is sitting down while he's just barely lifting Simba over his head. Like, bro, get your Diddy Kong looking butt off the ground and lift up this future king. But they can't really do that because in real life, these type of monkeys don't really stand the way they can when you traditionally animate them. Thus, once that one-time watch is over and that theater experience is over, the movie doesn't have as much to offer and thus gets all of these crappy reviews and this significantly diminished legacy. So first off, I would say that the Lion King remake did prove the financial genius behind Disney's live-action remake strategy. Like, say what you want about its quality, but it's pretty clear that especially when Disney utilized their Renaissance films for remaking, they were essentially printing money. Like, they did not have to spend as much time creating a story, and they don't have to put in as much effort because most people are not expecting it to be as good as the original. So without question, Disney definitely had a massive financial win with The Lion King, and it overall demonstrated just how effective this strategy was. But it also did show a little bit that it was probably eventually going to burst once people got tired of cynical remakes. And I think in a way The Lion King was the breaking point of that, because after that pretty much all of their remakes took a dramatic nosedive in box office returns. COVID also had to do with that, but it was also, I think, partially this movie too. But I also think that the Lion King remake is a textbook example of what a soulless movie looks like. I mean, think about it. This movie has technically groundbreaking, phenomenal animation. It has a technically brilliant story. It has a proven quality director and a bunch of provenly talented vocalists. It has all of the technical ingredients for a phenomenal film, yet it feels, to I'd say majority of people, utterly lifeless and drained of charm. That's because this movie did not feel like it had the same care and effort put into it as the original film. To most people, this movie felt like a mashed together cash grab that just kind of went through the motions just for the sake of capitalizing on a successful business model. Hence, why as soon as this movie left the theaters, nobody gave a crap about it. Everyone forgot about it, everyone just went back to watch the original, and now, when looking back on it, most people seem to feel about nothing when they watch it. Again, perfect example of soulless. It has this brilliant skin while it's in the theater, so it makes a ton of money, but as soon as that theater experience wears off, you see that beneath the surface, this film had nothing to offer. Thus, nobody cared about it. So that's ultimately what I think the Lion King remake's legacy is. It probably could be considered one of the most cynical blockbusters of the last decade, and one of the most successful cash grabs of all time. But this movie has certainly not aged well. But hey, they do have the prequel coming out later this year. I don't think that's really going to change much of the legacy of this remake. If anything, it's just going to hurt it more. But if Mufasa the Lion King is a good film, then I imagine people are just going to care about that movie because it's a fresh story that was never brought to screen before, but it's not going to make them view the Lion King remake any differently. So I think the Lion King remake has firmly set itself in stone as a highly successful yet very hollow cash grab. But that is the video. Thank you for watching. Be sure to check out the other videos in my 5 Years Later series. Next up, we have Joker. And this is definitely going to be a pretty complicated one to do because with the release of its sequel, I'm not entirely sure how the reception of Joker 1 is restructuring now. But hopefully I'll be able to sort that out. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.